We're going to take a look at farming today and ask the question, does the Labour Party care about farmers? And in fact, are they conducting a war on small farming in this country in favour of large farming corporations? So there are three elements to this. The first element being the inheritance tax that's been placed on farmers. That's happened over the last few months. We're going to look at whether that's fair, whether farmers should have the inheritance tax placed upon them. Then we're going to have a quick look at subsidy. But finally, we're going to look at confiscation of land, that being my biggest problem. But the first thing we're going to do is look at the inheritance tax. So is it right, is it fair that farmers have the same inheritance tax as everybody else? Probably yes. I understand the reasons why farmers don't like the inheritance tax. They are asset rich and cash poor, at least some of them will be. There will be some farmers who are very well off, but there's also going to be a lot of farmers who are just keeping the farm going, who pass the farm down generation to generation, and they kind of husband that land, and as a result, they'll have a large amount of farming equipment. So if you're looking at assets, and that's how you have to look at this, and you've got a tractor worth, £250,000, you've also got a house on there, you've got some fields, you've got a couple of other bits of farming equipment, you've got cattle. You're going to reach the threshold for that quite quickly. And often that land or those assets or, the livestock that a business has, the floating assets that farmers have, they're not going to be sold. They're just going to be passed on to the next generation. And as a result, what happens is when farmers need to pass the land on when they die, then often those people, if the inheritance tax is going to be applied in full, they're not going to be able to keep it going. They're going to have to sell a lot of the land, and either that's going to degrade over the generations very slowly to the point where the land's just eaten up, or the offspring of these farmers in a lot of cases are just going to decide, this isn't going to be worth me going on. We're already struggling as it is, and I'm going to have to sell off a bit of the farm just to keep going. And so, what's the point in going on? And these are all completely valid arguments to make. The other side of the argument, of course, is, well, why should farmers get treated any differently? You may have a rich person from the city, for instance, who may just buy a bit of farmland in order to avoid paying inheritance tax. I don't think that's a large proportion, but it certainly is a practice that goes on, and it could be legislated against in Parliament in some way if they could find a way to do that. However, there are arguments for and against farmers having the inheritance tax fully applied to them, or having certainly a higher amount placed on there above the £1 million that is the tax break or the inheritance tax break that they get. That could be debated. For me, I'm not envious of farmers. I don't mind farmers having a few quid. I'm not at all concerned with farmers, being well off or passing that through the generations. I believe food security to be important. However, I also recognise that although I don't believe the farmers should be pulled into this inheritance tax, I can see the other arguments for that, and they have to be recognised. So, it is up for debate whether that's fair or not. Now, second, we come to subsidies. Now, post-Brexit, when we came out of the EU were paying British farmers a subsidy for kind of husbanding the land, keeping the soil nice, regenerating and keeping the property nice, as it were. And I believe they were paid something per head for cattle or sheep, something like that. I'm not knee-deep in this stuff, so it's hard for me to go into these subsidies in general. However, the theory of subsidy is something that's completely different. So, should farmers receive a subsidy from the government for completing their work? For really what farmers are, they husband the land. They're supposed to tend for the land. They're the best people to look after the land, and so really they should be looking after that land anyway. And so, could you argue against farming receiving a subsidy? Yes. you could well argue against that. And in fact, in terms of farming, and I recognise that a lot of farmers, won't like me saying this, but irrelevant of that fact, farming should not receive any special subsidies. As a general principle, farmers should be looking after the land, and really they shouldn't be receiving extra money for doing so. They're a business and they have to stand on their own 2 feet. So as a result, the farming subsidy for being ecologically aware, I just think that's something farmers should do. And if the country's short of money, we're not able to fund old people's social care, for instance, then really we need to be looking at certain things, which are the subsidies, and I don't have a problem with removing those subsidies, as much as that may annoy some people. Now, the third area is something that I'm quite concerned about, and this is compulsory purchase of farmland. So what we're drifting into now is in the realms of property ownership, and what we're talking about is this lunatic left-wing government, I think I can say that, who are currently in the process of destroying our school system, destroying our tax system, and destroying business in the UK, and they're moving on to farming now. And what the new legislation is essentially doing, it means that local authorities can go up to a farmer and say, right, we want to build a housing estate here or some houses here, so we're going to give you what we would term to be fair value for your land. Not market value for your land, fair value for your land. Now, there's a specific difference there, and probably quite a large financial difference, and that's one of the reasons why they're talking about fair value. And to highlight that, Jacob Rees-Mogg had a chat with an ex-Labour activist, we'll call him, on this topic. And we'll just watch that and then we'll continue from there.
And I think that the fair current value, because future values are hypothetical. And just one last thing to say, because you were very eloquent just before, but on housing, a lot of this housing is intended to give people homes, not for future profit growth. And I think as long as it's fair value...
I'm strongly in favour of planning reform. I'm strongly in favour when the Conservatives...
Because we need it, don't we? We need it. The system is... I sat on committees for years. It's in a real mess.
And I happen to think that if you have more planning, the price of farmland for planning will fall because you'll have more available. It will be a market system. Mm-hmm. And that if you make planning more available, then people will, by and large, sell their land because they want to get the premium. It doesn't need that confiscatory element. It's the confiscatory element that I really object to, and I think fundamentally undermines property rights.
Yeah. Well, look, Jacob, like you, not as many, I suspect, are as large, but I'm a property owner. I know the importance of this to people, Englishmen's homes, their castle, and all of that. But the government has got to, if this government doesn't deliver the new homes, if it doesn't deliver cheaper power and cheaper utility bills, it will not get re-elected. This bill today, I sat on planning committees for so many years, it's going to slim down the number of councillors and make them better able to do their job. It's going to introduce new development boards to cut through bureaucracy, which we can both agree is needed. I think fair value, it's not talking about stealing or taking, it's about fair current value.
And I agree with Development Corporation, Stockland's Development Corporation worked extremely effectively.
Great things.
Having authorities that have a planning ability to get things done. But actually, when you talk about the bureaucracy, what is it? It's BAT surveys, it's NEWT surveys, it's the Nutrients Directive. It's all of this that has made it unbelievably expensive, and this constant series of reports that you have to have. So you're on the cusp of getting...
And a lot of that's going, right? So
that needs to go.
Yeah.
But then the market will flourish. You don't need to confiscate, because frankly, most people offered a market price for an acre of land will sell.
Well, many will, and but it's confiscate is an interesting word. CPOs are not confiscation; they're things being purchased at the current fair value to achieve broader public good. It's not confiscation.
I think that's the real difficulty, because it's not setting a market value; it's setting a bureaucratic.
So let's call it what it is. It's confiscation of farmland. Now, however you put this, however you want to look at it, and however you feel about it, as the Labour person said there, it's really down to how you want to frame it. Well, let's frame it like this. The government's going to come along and confiscate land from people because it feels that we need to build some homes on there. And that's not acceptable. If somebody owns some land, that's their land. You could say, well, we've got this multi-trillion pound thing going on here where we need to build a road, and this road is necessary for the infrastructure, the fundamental infrastructure for this country. And that's okay. So what you would do is you would come and you would give that person market value for that land. I do not have a problem with that. What I do have a problem with is giving the power to local authorities to go up to a farmer and say, right, we've had to think about this and we've decided that we're going to purchase your land and this is the price that we're going to give you because we believe that that's fair. That's not fair. That's stealing. It's confiscation of property. It's not down to how you frame it, with the little giggle at the end of the sentence as that Labour activist did. People often do that and they belie what their argument is. So when asked a question, the man kind of says, well, it's how you frame it, in a little laugh. That means he knows it's confiscation, and it is confiscation. And what we're into now is the realms of property rights. And this is very dangerous territory. A local authority going up to a farmer and saying, we're having that field and we're going to give you that. This is completely not on. And so on to the philosophy of the Labour Party relating to farmers. So we've got a couple of clips here. The first clip is from a man called John McTernan, and he is what you can class as a rabid socialist. And so he was part of Tony Blair's government, and he's what you might call part of the Labour Party intelligentsia. And so whilst he doesn't have a fixed position, an elected position in government or elsewhere, he's regularly wheeled out in front of the media, and he's part of the voices that are behind the Labour movement. So he has a voice within this, and he's voicing what a lot of Labour people believe. So let's listen to Mr. McTernan spout his bile.
You would do to farmers what Margaret Thatcher did to miners, which was, and she used very heavy-handed police tactics, followed by what? Putting them out of business.
If people are so upset that they want to go on the streets and spray slurry on them, then we don't need the small farmers.
Well, there you have it. We don't need small farmers. And there's a gap opens. And just for a moment, we see sunlight, we see truth. This is how they really feel behind the scenes. This is what they really think. Now, here's Keir Starmer giving his point of view on farming and trying to draw a false equivalence between the choices of the NHS and farming, little realising, of course, that we spend far more on other things. It's not about the farmers, it's about the whole raft of measures, and I think you get to see through Keir Starmer's act here when you see what he's doing.
Do they prefer their waiting lists to come down? Do they want their mortgages to come down, the economy to start working for everyone? That's what we're trying to achieve. Or do we want to keep a tax break for farmers? But you can't have both.
And of course, here's a little photo of Keir Starmer with Bill Gates. What does this photo mean? What's the point of this photo? Is this really what they're thinking? The Labour Party despises generational wealth. They don't like it. They want to tax you in death, and an inheritance tax is a disgusting tax. You're born, you pay tax. Everything you do, you buy food to live, you pay tax. You work, you pay tax. You buy a house, you pay tax. There's taxes everywhere. You get taxes on taxes on taxes. And then you die. And then you want to leave something for your children, something that you've built up over the whole of your life, and the government steps in at the end, and if you've done well for yourself, then they can take a nice chunk of that. It's not a nice tax, inheritance tax, and it's one of those taxes that I believe should be abolished immediately. But in doing this, I think the Labour Party have shown their true colours, and it's shining for all to see. First of all, what they do is they hit small farmers with an inheritance tax, which means that when the current generation of farmers dies, it's going to be very difficult for a lot of smaller farms to continue. And the government have made it clear, as with Mr. McTurnan, we don't need small farmers. We can do without them, really. Then they stopped the subsidies. Okay, you've decided to stop the subsidies. We did vote for Brexit, and one of the things the EU did do was spend a lot on farming, and so that subsidy's gone. Okay, that one's gone. So now, what we're going to do now? Oh, I know what we'll do. In addition to taking land from farmers because they have to pay inheritance tax and removing any subsidies that they have to husband the land, now what we're going to do, if the local authority perhaps doesn't like a farmer, they're going to go along and just take some of his land because they've decided that there's a housing crisis. There's a housing crisis, and so they can take farmers' land. Well, if you wanted to have a look at that housing crisis, what I would advise you did is, if you go onto the internet and you type in to Google homes for sale, there'll be a few websites pop up. And if you click on that website link, what you'll see is a massive range of houses available in every area of the country. There isn't a housing crisis in this country. There's a social housing crisis in this country. And it's often mixed in those two terms. So what's happening here? The Labour Party are using this social housing crisis in order to facilitate the confiscation of farmers' land. This is a very, very worrying development for all of those people like myself who believe strongly in property ownership. This Labour government, whatever you may think of them, is the most left-wing Labour government of my lifetime. They are going to keep pushing farther and faster. They haven't even been in power for a year, and they are causing carnage. And by the time of the next budget, it's going to get even worse because the economy is going to be so bad that the costs of our borrowing are going to increase. So any of these tax measures that end up going on are just going to be wiped out through increases in debt repayments. So this government is doing its very best to destroy this country. And I think this latest development here with the forced confiscation, that's how I'm framing it, confiscation of land, is a very, very worrying development. Anyway, thanks very much for your time. I do appreciate it.